All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. This is one of our weekly webinars, but it's part of a monthly series of best practices. Wanted to just kind of say thank you all for the people that showed up on time. It tends to be the case that we get people that come in a little bit late. So while we're kind of getting ready or waiting for them, I guess not waiting for them, let's get started. Let's not wait for them. But what do you say we talk a little bit about the webinar itself, give you a reference of what we're doing, and kind of get started so that when they join us, we're ready to rock. Does that sound okay with everybody? Cool. Well, first thing I want to let you guys know is that that we are recording today. So let me just get my laser pointer out here. Bam! So that's got right there. So yeah, so we're going to be recording. All of our webinars are recorded, and they are posted online, usually on our YouTube page for later viewing. So if you have, if you want to kind of reference this yourself, or if you want to recommend it to colleagues or employees, definitely go ahead and do so, and these will be right up for you there online. So next thing I want to mention is that I am Jay West. I'm an educational consultant. That is my real email, so you are welcome to email me anytime you like, especially if you have some sort of money-making scheme that that can benefit me or both of us. I'd love to talk to you. But I am an independent consultant. I am an independent trainer. So is Joe. Joe Medash is my training partner. Joe is on a plane. It'll be great to see if Joe actually can join us from the plane. I know that he's got Wi-Fi connection up there. He's just a little bit concerned about the guy sleeping next to him. And sorry about that. Let's see if we can fix this guy up. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, Joe is going to Joe's going to join it. Joe's going to join us. He is going to, hopefully he will, and he'll be from a plane, so it'll be kind of cool. Joe's also an independent trainer, so anything that we say, anything that we talk about here is is representative of our feelings, of our opinions, not necessarily those of Retrotec, although we will be discussing Retrotec items. So thank you for that. Another thing that I kind of want to mention, make sure that you understand, is that these are best practices. So best practices tend to be opinion, but they tend to be sort of an opinion made by a group of people, people that are in the industry, people that are doing work. So just one second here. I want to fix something here. I'm going to pause in this, and I think what we've got going on here is, yeah, sorry about that. Bear with me. We've got some technical difficulties. You should be seeing the head of an American Indian here any second. But yeah, so sorry about those. I had it on, accidentally had it set for automatic, so I was on. So that's not cool. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about how the webinar works. And once again, this is us talking about opinions, about tried and true, sort of tested, better ways to do things. That's what a best practice is. But I'm going to repeat this throughout our presentation. That again, this might be an opinion. We're definitely not saying this is the way it was designed to be used exactly. In fact, best practices tend to be how things were not designed, but better ways to use them. And hopefully, you hear some stuff that you like, and if you do, chime in. Another thing about this webinar is that just again some general information is that you can get this little control bar out of your way. If you're not interested in that thing, if you just want to sit back and enjoy it, go ahead and do that. You can set it in your settings to auto hide, make it go away. You can sort of maximize it or minimize it as you wish if you don't like it. But we really want to encourage you to interact with us. We want to know. We're going to be asking you some polls. We're going to be, wondering about you. We want your input, especially if we're talking about best practices, because you have ways of doing it yourself. Many of you have been doing this for a very long time, or have insights from people that have been doing it a very long time. We really want you to share. So this is kind of how you're going to do it. You'll see that in your control panel, there's an area to ask questions. Well, it doesn't just have to be a question. If you've got a comment, if you've got an opinion, if you've got anything that you want to to add to this, go ahead and go through that question thing. I'll see that. I'm going to try and stop intermittently throughout the webinar so that I can take a look at those questions. You know, I kind of have a lot going on. I'm trying to, you know, make sure that this thing doesn't run automatically, so that you can enjoy it and so that you can get everything that you came here for, and that we can, you know, kind of make the best of your time. We've got Sasha in the background. Sasha is a Retrotec employee. Thank you so much, Sasha, for joining me again, and he's going to be supporting us with some of the polls and some of the questions, and trying to make sure that that we don't run into any problems. The guy's a genius. Also wanted to mention that, yeah, so if you have anything, when we ask a poll, if it's sort of a none of the above or an other situation, just say, hey, this is, you know, you didn't mention this in that poll, send it in through the questions. So if everybody's okay with that, we'll move on. All right, great. I'm not seeing anything on the board. Testing, I see that, Adrian, so you're good to go. If you can't hear me, if you're just seeing some text, then I don't know why I'm mentioning this, because you can't hear what I'm saying, but for those of you that can't hear me, if anything goes wrong, this is where, go into your settings and change your speaker settings, your mic settings, your speaker settings. That's where everything is. Oftentimes it might be the case that you have your headphones plugged in, but the sound is still coming out of your speakers, and you don't want to do that. This is where you can fix those settings. So again, if you have any more questions, send them in through the question panel. Big deal, want to let you guys know, some of the first people to find out about this, and that's important, that next February in Seattle, 4th and 5th, and looks like I misspelled Seattle. It says settle. I did that so you'll remember. That's on purpose. The 4th and 5th, and that is, I believe, a Wednesday and a Thursday. Those days are immediately in Seattle. Those days will be immediately following the ACI Regional Conference. If you want to attend that, please do so. We'll be presenting there as well. But we're going to do a multi-fan testing symposium. Symposium means it's a small conference, so we only have room for 60 people. It's a hands-on conference, so we don't make a lot of room. We only have a small amount of capacity. So please, if you're interested in this, get the ball rolling immediately. You want to get signed up for this immediately, because you know, we don't want to have the problem that we have to turn people away. This is going to be incredible. The last time we did this, I think 2 or 3 years ago, it was a smashing success. We get people from all over the world that come in for this, so hopefully you can make it. There will be conference deals, specials on hotel rooms and the like that will be extended from the ACI conference, but you don't necessarily have to attend the ACI conference, so we hope to see you there. Everybody okay with that? When will the webinar start? It has started. This is a webinar about, we're meta-webinaring. Thank you. So this is a very important part. And this is pertinent to our webinar. If you miss something, if we go out, if we lose contact, if you can't remember something, if there's information that you want, any other information, this is the place to go, retrotec.com. You can see here that there is a panel right on the main screen, downloads, more, meet, support, stuff like that. If you go into the support menu, you're going to see these panels, and this is going to give you everything that we're going to talk about today and more. There's going to be all kinds of information, videos, and the recorded webinars. This is a great place, this is an easy place to find them. All of our manuals, you'll see our quick guides, which are intended for specific actions, but then manuals, which are sort of like you know, reference guides or almost a wiki. Anything like that's going to be on there. So we got the FAQs, everything like that. So again, if you have any questions, if anything's interesting to you that you want to learn more about, or if you want to reference it, this is the place to find it. All right? Any questions about that? All right, let's move to the next stop. Again, just a quick mention of this to give you an idea of what these manuals are like. I can't stress enough that these are an incredible reference. Both our manuals and our guides are very visual. They're in multiple languages, especially useful for people who have staff who speak a different language. They're in Russian, they're in Spanish, they're in French. And many of them are in other languages as well. This is an incredible reference. They're very useful, and many of them are just recently up to date. So again, those are found on the retrotec.com webpage. You've seen many of these included in your equipment if you've already bought equipment. Thank you for that. But today we're talking about best practices. So this is more to the point. And this is a best practice that we've seen that I don't think meets OSHA guidelines. Do we have any OSHA inspectors out there that can tell us, does this meet a guideline? You know, basically what we have here is we've got one guy in a forklift picking up another guy in a forklift picking up a piece of heavy machinery, and then 4 guys standing around checking it out. I don't know if these guys actually work here or if they're just having a good time. We are back on track. Okay, great. So first things first, let's get right into it. Setting up your manometer so that it runs the best. You want to make sure that you have that weekly you're checking your gauge, and monthly you're checking your system. You want to sort of do you want to make sure that it's calibrated. Now our manometers and our fans our digital manometers and our fans only need to be calibrated every 5 years. Our digital manometers, the DG32, can be updated online frequently for the firmware, the software. You use a piece of software to do that called the configurator, the gauge configurator, that's available free at the same place that I discussed earlier, which is why I brought that up. Some important things to do when you're setting up. So let's talk about a best practice for a weekly field gauge. All right, for a weekly calibration of your field gauge, or making sure that it's running correctly. So if you have your DM32, you're going to go to this screen. You want to check your pressure. Make sure that when you do this test, when you do this weekly calibration test that we're about to discuss, that what you do is, let's see here, is that you check first that you have the right settings, right? So the first thing we want to do is make sure that channel A and channel B are set for pressure. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're sort of comparing apples to oranges, because what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be checking on whether or not this guy works, or whether your hoses work, whether you're correctly, and then whether your channels are calibrated correctly, and that's very, very important to do. So next thing we want to do is we want to set it for a time average. So we want to set it for about a 5-second time average. That's in the settings. When you go to the settings screen, you're going to tap settings on there. You're going to tap time average and go to 5. You might have it set for something different, and that's perfectly fine. But for this activity, we want to set to 5. Any questions about that? All right, great. So the next thing we want to do is we want to take the tubes that we use every day, or the tubes that we use constantly. We want to make sure that these that we're testing to make sure not just that the gauge is calibrated, but that the tubes are running correctly, are set up right, don't have any breaks, cuts, openings. So what we're going to do is just basically go through each tube and plug each tube that we use, that's part of our umbilical, to each one of the channels, and we're going to cross-reference each channel. So we want to connect the red tube between the red and the yellow ports, and then the red tube between the green and the yellow ports, and the green and the red, and kind of go through it like this. And I think the next screen we have gives us a real nice visual of how that works. Basically, these tubes that you're going to see in this visual, they are connected to each other. So both those yellow tubes are connected, and you see now I've gone cross channel to cross channel with both of the yellow tubes, with both of the red tubes, and the idea being that once I'm finished with that, or as I do that, that I'm going to get a reading, and regardless of what the reading is, because pressure will build up, regardless of whatever that reading is that I get, it needs to be between the channel A and the channel B. They need to be within about 2%. So what we're doing here is we are sort of, it's very, very meta. We are using a differential pressure gauge to check the difference between the two gauges. So that probably makes it a little bit more confusing. What I'm trying to point out here is that we're trying to make sure that each one of those, that both sides, that channel A and channel B, are working about the same. So regardless of what your readings are, you want to make sure that we're comparing this channel and this channel are within about 2% of each other. If they're not, one of them is wrong. There's something wrong with one of them, and we definitely recommend that you send that one in for calibration, or check with our sales and support team to see if there's something else you can do. But the first thing you want to do is just check those tubes. So that's sort of a best practice that you want to keep up on. Next best practice that you want to do, or that you want to keep up on, that you want to use, is making sure that your actual fan is calibrated. Now this might be a little bit difficult to see for you, but this is a calibration plate. That calibration plate is sold. We sell it. I know that it's available through Retrotec tools and some of the other some other resellers. Essentially, what this thing does is it goes on the end. It's attached to the end of your flex tube of your flex duct. And it's got a tap right here that you'll plug your tube in, your input tube, your blue tube, and then you run it as if you were running a regular duct test. Now, the way that this works is that this hole has been measured, so this is also a known hole. So essentially, you will know the size of this hole. So when you run your duct test, you should get readings that say that this is exactly this size. The equivalent leakage is exactly the size of this hole. Now, you can also make one yourself. So one of the best practices, and some of the things that we're going to talk about are as we go through this webinar, I'm just going to say DIY, do it yourself. And that means, hey, you can do it this way. If you do it right, it should be great, it should work fine. It doesn't mean that that I recommend this specifically, but I've heard other people tell me that they've done it and it works great. So if you're going to make your own calibration plate, here's some pointers. One, make sure that it's a smooth piece of material. You don't want anything corrugated because you want to make sure that the flange or the end of that other of the flex duct connects to it tightly, that there's no leaks. Because remember, what we're trying to do is we want to make sure we know exactly the amount of flow that comes through that plate. You want to add an additional flange. This makes it easier. Again, this is a best practice. You don't have to do it this way, but I think the easiest way to do it is to actually maybe take a piece of flex. And I know people that have mentioned that they've done this before. It's not the way that Retrotec recommends it, but you can take an extra piece of flex, buy an extra piece of flex, and I'll tell you some other ways that you can use that. But add a flange on it just like you would when you connect it to your ductwork, and you might want to put a piece of Velcro on it, or maybe even a mechanical fastener, and even fasten your DIY plate to it. Okay, make sure that you add tape additionally, because again, we want to make sure that it's tightly closed. And then what you want to do is you want to measure on that DIY piece of material, that DIY calibration plate that you just made. You want to make sure that you add two things. One, that you add some way for you to take the pressure, that you have some sort of tap on it, or that you have a hole that's tightly sealed so that you can take the pressure from it using your blue tube, your input. And then you want to also make sure that you cut a hole and you know exactly the size of that hole. So you want to measure that hole, because again, what we're going to be doing is running a duct test. We know what the flow through that hole should be, and so when we check and run it, we want to make sure that that's there. Okay, great. Let's talk about some of the best practices for sealing up grills. So the next thing you're kind of doing at the house when you're running a duct test is you're going to seal up all the supply and return grills and registers or registers. And that's a terminology thing, and I hope I've got that right. Please correct me if I'm using incorrect terminology. Thank you. Sometimes they're regional too, so I don't want to confuse you. First thing you need to be asking yourself, if you're working on a program or if you're doing some code, if you're testing to a specific code, does that code ask you to attach the mask to a register or to the wall? And that can be a very, very big difference, because there can be leakage. You know, there's a hole cut behind here that this duct boot goes through, and oftentimes the leakage between those two can be hidden if you actually tape it all around to the wall. Does everybody understand that? Send me a question if you want me to explain that a little bit better. So many times there are codes or program dictates or standards that specifically say that you are supposed to tape to the wall, or you're supposed to tape to the grill. If you can do either, I would recommend that if you're looking for accuracy, and accuracy does matter, that you tape, as this guy did right here in our guide, right to the grill. And again, that's my attitude. That's not necessarily something that Retrotec says you have to do. There's a DIY way to do this, and I learned this from a lot of guys who do the rough-end work who are working on either gut rehabs or are working in new buildings where they're actually putting in the HVAC equipment, the duct work into houses that don't have any walls. So oftentimes when they're putting that in, they're using the same size boots, the same size registers over and over again. So what many of them have done, they've actually taken foam blocks and cut the foam blocks. It doesn't make any difference what kind of foam you use, but I've seen them use whatever they have on. So oftentimes it's sort of a rigid foam. Some of them will actually tape a handle onto it so they can put it in and out. And instead of taping over the register, they actually take the register off, or they do it before the register, and they'll push the block into the boot and pressure fit it. And then they can pull them back out. They usually have like a big contractor trash bag. They'll, they throw it into the back of the back of the truck. And when they get out there, they walk around, just grab one out, and just stick it in there, close it up, and then when they're done with their test, they pull it out. So that's kind of a DIY practice. I don't know if that works for you, and it can save you a lot of time, especially if you do this frequently. Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody else have any little tricks that they use that they'd like me to share? All right, cool. So let's talk about, let's see here if I still got this guy working. Let's talk about sort of another trick that we can use, or another best practice that we can use to make this a little bit easier. For me, my opinion, of course, is that the next one, the grill mask dispenser, is, you guessed it, indispensable. That is a bad pun, and I apologize immediately for my humor. Oh, great. By the way, before we move on to, or before we talk about the next one, I want to mention something that Pam Pierce mentioned. Pam, thank you so much for your input, for your comment. She says, hey, have the contractor put the mask on so he can't complain. That is a very good idea, Pam. So they can't complain that you're not covering it up correctly, that the leakage is coming from your inability to put it on. That's a very good idea. Thank you, Pam. Keep them coming, Pam. It looks like you might have some great ideas that I'd love to know more about. I have, of all the inanimate objects that I have an ongoing secret war with, probably the most humiliating one is the tape. I don't know what it is, if there's some kind of brain damage that I've done to myself or something, but I have the hardest time controlling tape. So I find this to be indispensable. Essentially what this is a strap goes around your neck, and then you put your roll of tape on this roll right here. And then as you go through the house, you can actually just pull the tape off, tear it off, and stick it on. It's very, very useful. It makes things go a lot faster, and it can save you a lot of excruciating frustration if you're someone like me. But these are very easy to build. In fact, I've done this myself, and I know plenty of people who do this. Just take a piece of PVC or a dowel rod. You can connect eye hooks to the ends of the dowel rod, or you can run another piece of, like, even as simple as a wire hanger through the middle of the PVC to sort of recreate this guy right here, this tube that you put your tape on, and then you can just take a shoulder strap that you have left over from, I don't know, a piece of furniture, or I'm sorry, a piece of furniture, a piece of a carrying case or anything like that. Put it around your neck, and then it makes it a whole lot easier to fly through this. So I've got a point here. Someone out there, Guy, he says that I used a press and seal Glad and depressurized to hold it better. Good point. So what Guy's saying is that he actually uses the Glad wrap, sort of the cooking stuff, the kitchenware stuff. And that's a great one. And he mentions that he depressurizes. And Guy, I'm going to mention that later. Thank you so much. But that is really, really important, the difference between depressurization and pressurization. Pam warns not to put it on wet paint or painted within 1 day, and take it off within a few hours. Right. Don't leave it on for very long. Anything can stick to that paint, especially in a new building. Thank you so much. And Guy uses vent caps. Guy, thank you so much for the segue, because I also want to recommend these. And again, we are a reseller of vent caps, but I want to tell you from my personal experience and from people who I know, they really, really love this. And as you can see, it's very simple. Essentially what he's doing here is he's connecting a hook. It has a string that runs through the cap. Then he runs the cap up there, sort of a pulley system, seals it to the vent, and he's done. No mess, no fuss. It's very easy. It's very quick. If you think about the amount of tape that you use, it pays for itself in no time. So it's very, very easy to use. I highly recommend it myself personally. I like it quite a bit, but whatever works best for you. You know, obviously sometimes now if you have many vents, you might not have enough of these. So usually what I do is kind of a combination of tape and these and the vent caps. And these are great. I highly recommend them. Anybody else use those? Great. Well, I'm glad to see that we got a lot of positive feedback because I really like those. Corey's a great guy, makes a great product. Make sure that you remove the air filter. Anybody want to guess out there why you have to remove the air filter before you do the test, especially for our newbies? Exactly. Thank you. Yep. Airflow. Thank you, Alan. That's exactly right. We want to make sure that we're not impeding airflow. We're not trying to measure how much air can move through an air filter. We're trying to measure how much infiltration is coming through the ductwork. So this guy right here basically is a major obstacle, or a real obstacle for us. A best practice, if there isn't a filter rack on there, you probably want to put a filter rack on or tape over it. So you want to make sure that that you do that, because again, depending on what you're testing, you're looking for, unless that's what you want to find out. If you want to find out if you've done a good enough job without a filter rack, which I actually still don't recommend, because I know plenty of people who will tell you that lack of a filter rack can depressurize the chasm, which is a completely different problem. But we have a question here. So the question is, how would you account for leakage around the grills? So that leakage around the grills, it's up to you. So Tobias, thank you for that question. It really, really depends on if that's what you're looking for. If that's in the, oftentimes my answer to you would be, my answer to all these questions is going to be, it depends. It depends on who you are. It depends on what code you're testing to. It depends on what you're looking for. But if you are looking to account for leakage around the grills, then make sure that you seal to the face of that grill and nothing else. Then you're going to be able to see that. Then you'll be able to find that leakage around there when you test it. But if you don't care about that, then you can tape to the wall, or you can tape around the duct, or you can actually use that sort of foam block method that I told you about before, where you're actually stopping the pressure before it actually gets all the way to the end of the boot. I hope that helps. Be sure to check the furnace if the contractor is there. I've seen them block off one filter or put plastic on the back of the filter to get better numbers. Pam, thank you. That's a very sly move. Yes, definitely. Make sure you check everything before you test. If you're going to be there, if you're going to be putting the tape on, or even if somebody else is putting the tape on, make sure that you investigate that. No, Tobias, your answer is no. You don't have to use tape, but the best case scenario, or sorry, the best practice to me in my mind is that if I want to make sure that I don't account for the grills, I want to put a tape on there, or you can use some other stuff that we'll talk about a little bit. But yeah, some of those things might be, for instance, using. I've seen people use magnetic covers. Magnetic covers is similar, or like Guy said, you can actually use Reynolds wrap type of thing, but both of those are not very effective if you're pressurizing. Again, we'll talk about this in a second, but when you pressurize the ductwork, you have a tendency to blow some of your covers off. So you might want to use tape, and maybe you might want to use tape and then some kind of an additional piece of material, some kind of mechanical fastener, or you might want to use any number of things to make sure that isn't pushed off. And okay, and Pam. So Pam's talking a little bit about codes here. Pam says magnetic covers are horrible. So that's Pam's opinion. Thank you, Pam, for sharing that. And Pam also mentions that Energy Star requires a filter cover to be airtight. So remove the filter, but don't tape the cover. Thank you. And again, it just depends. So let's move on a little bit. Let's move on to the next one here. So it says, just make sure that when you're running a test, and if you're running a total leakage test, that you slightly open a door or a window, because you're running the fan inside. Because you might be depressurizing, or especially if you're depressurizing the ductwork, you might be sucking in a lot of air from the outside, and there is a slight chance that you could somehow damage the house because of the pressures that you're creating. So it's often recommended that you just sort of crack a window or crack a door when you're running a duct test inside the house. Make any sense? All right. So let's see. So I want to address that. Looks like we have a second here, and we are getting a little late on time. Phil wants to ask if there was a correction. So Phil, I'm not exactly sure. I'll come back to you, Phil, but so that you can make sure that I answer your question, okay? Because I don't know what that question is. So you want to make sure that you that you're inserting that blue tube into the supply register. That blue tube is connected to your input, and that is what you're really going to be testing. So that is your channel B. That is going to give you the readings that you're getting from your test, your results. All right. So that blue tube, it's important to put that into a supply register, and you might want to use a pitot tube, not a pitot tube, a static pressure tube. Here's the difference. So the difference between these guys, and so why would you want to use this one as opposed to this one, or even use any one at all? Well, if you're testing from the supply duct, there is a chance that you're going to get a lot of air moving through that ductwork. If that air is moving through that ductwork, a tube or a pitot tube, the regular blue tube, can actually get a lot of wind, a lot of turbulence, a lot of air movement, or even what we call the Venturi effect, can actually affect your readings. So a static pressure tube actually has holes that go across. So if you're pointing this guy into the flow of the air, then the air will actually move around it, and we don't have to worry about air blowing in there and actually messing up our readings. So does that make sense to everybody? So again, this is another best practice that I've heard a lot about that works really well. I would also recommend that if you're making your own calibration plate, that you definitely use a static pressure probe, because you might get a lot of wind blowing right into your tube. Any more questions about that? Let's move on. All right, so let's talk about actually attaching the flange to the grill or to the register. I think that's the right. Is that the most generic term? It's best when it's attached to the largest return register. It doesn't necessarily make a difference. Of course, it depends. But if there's a return in every room, you might want to install the duct tester on the air handler itself. That's also, a good, a good best practice. It just depends on. I've seen contractors, HVAC contractors, who install the same kind of furnace over and over again, and so they know exactly how big the box is, how big the quote-unquote squirrel cage is. So many of them have actually bent their own metal that fits right onto this 10-inch flange, and they reuse it over and over again. They'll actually just come in, stick that on to the air handler itself, tape around it, and then connect that very quickly and easily connect the flex tube to it. But if you don't want to do that, it's really just dependent on access and what the area is. Some of the DIY, some of the best practices that I've heard about making this work better, I've heard of people who have actually installed hooks, and that have sort of drilled them in and then covered them up, but they've actually put hooks on their flange, and then you hook those hooks onto the grill fins, and that keeps this on really nice and tightly. And that's especially helpful if this is a grill duct that's in the ceiling, so that the weight of the ductwork is hanging on it. I've heard of people that have used powerful magnets that they've glued to the flange that helps to hold that on. This is a little bit different than what Pam was mentioning earlier. Some of these guys that are pre-made, that are on the market, that are intended to hold to the other side of the ductwork, especially for pressurizing. But I've heard people gluing those really powerful magnets on, the really strong ones. But the most important thing is no matter what you'll do, or even if you don't do it, that you make sure that you tape all the way around this flange. And here you'll see this guy's actually taped around the outside of the grill itself as well. The idea being, again, that we want to test. We're looking for results from leakage in the ductwork, not from leakage around our tape. And believe me, this tape does have some leakage involved, so we want to make sure that that is extremely tight. All right, any more input out there? All right, so another great best practice that came in, Pam, thanks again. She says crack the false ceiling so air can get through it or it might pull down. Definitely. This is a great idea. So what she's saying is if you already have a drop ceiling in the house and you're creating pressures in the ductwork, take one of the panels and open it up and move it, actually pull it out, or make not a crack like a broken crack, but actually a little bit of hole so that air can move through there. Because if you've got a lot of leakage through that area, you could actually cause that to fail, cause that structure to fail. Question is, how do you handle a leaky furnace? Leaky furnace itself. So you're talking about the cage itself. Again, the idea is that when we're running this test, we're not only getting a number, right? We're not only looking to test to an amount of of leakage, of a specific result, but then we're also trying to identify that leakage and stop it. So I would say it would depend on, I would set it up for maybe a register and then run this and then look, with maybe depressurize it and then sort of use a smoke stick. That's what I've seen people do. I think that works, to use that smoke stick around the furnace itself. Sometimes you can find out about a leaky furnace without actually doing the duct test itself, just by turning on the air handler and using that smoke or any other, maybe your hand or whatever you like to use best around there. I hope that helps, Pam. The flex duct. So here's another idea. Try this. I think it's a great idea, and I know a lot of people who do this. They've actually employed this best practice where they buy a little bit of extra 10-inch Mylar flex, and they cut shorter lengths. So this is really helpful because if you've done these duct tests before and you've actually had your fan right next to the grill, and then you turn it on, especially if you're pressurizing, you'll find that then all of a sudden that Mylar expands, and it can knock your drink over, or it can push the fan over, or it can terrify some code inspector. But in the long run, it just kind of can be kind of a pain. So it's a good idea maybe to have a couple of lengths of Mylar flex that you use depending on how close to the grill it is you are. And again, it's probably best to have that flex not flex, to have it straightened out as much as possible. So not only that it doesn't expand, but then we get as little turbulence as possible. Right? So, okay, Pam, another great insight. So Pam wants to know, do you void the furnace warranty in some cases by sealing the furnace? I guess since you said in some cases, my answer would be yes, but again, it totally depends. And I definitely recommend, and this again is my personal opinion, that you do not void any furnace warranties. So definitely pay attention to the manufacturer's, per manufacturer's instructions, PMI, and definitely make sure that whatever you do, if it's whoever business it is or the homeowner that you're working for, make sure that everybody is comfortable about the way that you're testing. Thanks for that input. So here I want to talk a little bit now. We've mentioned this quite a bit, and here is I cannot tell you how pleased I am that my animation worked. But here's the difference basically between pressurization and depressurization. So it's fairly simple. As you can see, both of these guys, and I'm gonna get into this in detail. Both of these houses are set up essentially the same. The difference is, and as you saw, the fan, the direction that the fan points in. So let's talk a little bit about this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about two different types of testing. There are several different types of options for testing. We don't have, I think that's a completely different webinar in and of itself, and I would love to hear from you guys to find out if you're interested in that webinar. that will be a webinar about the variety of different ways that you can test ducts. But for today, if it's okay with you, I'd like to stick to total duct leakage. I think that's the most common one. And then I want to talk about leakage to outdoors. So either one of those can be, we can do a depressurization test or a pressurization test. Different codes, I know some of them specify that you have to either depressurize or pressurize. I will say this. If you have a choice, I would definitely choose depressurization, and I know that that's been echoed by many of you out there. And the main thing is simply that when you pressurize, you notice that we're blowing air, and we're blowing air out, and it's going to be blowing, pressure is going to be blowing out of the ducts. So these sealed registers with grill mask or whatever you have them sealed with, unless they're very strong, oftentimes they'll blow out. So when you depressurize it, you're actually sucking air in, and you're sucking those the cover a little bit tighter. So I definitely recommend that if you have a choice. Either way, we're normally going about 25 pascals, and we're looking, the readings are usually about 100 per 100 CFM. Does that make sense to everybody? Awesome. So let's talk about leakage to outdoors. This one I think sometimes confuses people, but I don't think it's too confusing. So there's just the idea is this, that now what we were testing before, if we're working in a house that hasn't been finished, if this is a rough-in test, then the total leakage is absolutely perfectly fine. It's probably one of the best tests because you're not worried about some of these interstitial spaces versus some of these internal or conditioned spaces. Sort of the shell is just the outside shell. We don't have any of these intermittent spaces. So, but here, if we're doing a retrofit, if we're doing a house where the drywall's up, I definitely recommend, if you can, if you have the option, I like to do outdoor testing, and this is why. What I'm doing here is I'm actually using a combination of a blower or fan to depressurize or pressurize the house. In here, we're actually talking about depressurizing the house, so the air is blowing out of the fan, and I'm using the duct tester to suck the air out of the duct. And what this does is I run both of these. So this is a manometer. So I'm using two manometers. And in this option 1, I'm depressurizing both the house to negative 25 pascals and the ductwork to negative 25 pascals. What we just did is we made sure that the environment, that the pressure environment in both this area and this area, the ductwork and the inside of the house, are exactly the same. We know that because we used a fan here and a fan here and a manometer on both of these sides to make sure that they're at the same. So now I know whatever leakage I get through here is coming from the ductwork that's outside of the house. It's not coming from connections from inside to outside of the house. So there was a question before about leakage from around the grills. Well, if that leakage is coming from inside the house, it may not matter to you. Do you understand? This is where that air is supposed to be going. So let's say that I'm depressurizing this particular house and I'm getting leakage from around the boot, but it's coming from inside the house. Well, in reality, that's probably not a big deal. So, because again, that's where that air is supposed to be delivered to anyway, right? So this tells us, that's why we call it leakage to outdoors. This tells us that it's not leakage between the house. See, it's been neutralized. It's leakage to the outdoors. I might be belaboring this point, but I find that some people get confused by it, so I want to make sure that everybody understands. Does anybody want me to explain that any further? Okay, cool. I'm going to move on to the next one. Same test, but now we're doing it with leakage. We're doing leakage to outside, and we're depressurizing. And I want to note something here. That remember, we're doing leakage, and this could also say with reference to outdoors. So we're testing how much this ductwork is leaking from the outdoors, or from not from the indoors, but we're also testing with reference to the outside. So you'll notice here that we have a T connection that is connecting both of these manometers to the same reference hose outside. So that's why I want to make sure the fan is negative 25 and the duct tester is negative 25 in reference to this one reference tube. It's a best practice. You can run two reference tubes, but and you could go through the effort to make sure that they're in the same place and everything like that, this I find is the best practice because this makes it easier, and this one you're absolutely sure that your reference point, which is right here, is the exact same for both gauges. Make sense, everybody? Okay. Here's your second option, where instead of where you reference the blower door to outside, and here we're pressurizing, so we're referencing the outside, the blower door, and on this one we are not referencing the duct tester to the outside. We're referencing it to the inside. So here you'll notice, and please I hope this isn't confusing, but here you'll notice that this gauge says 25 and this gauge says 0. Anybody want to venture a guess why those are different? Absolutely, thank you. That is exactly right. They're referencing two different points. So here we're pressurizing a house, and this house is pressurized to 25, and that's with the fan. But this house is pressurized, or this is the ductwork, and that wants to be to 0. So basically what this is telling us is that there is this tube, the end of this tube, which is inside the ductwork, with reference to this guy, this tap, which is reference to the inside. There should be no difference between these two. It should be 0. And if the house is negative 25 and there's no difference between this guy and this guy, that means there's no difference between this guy and this guy, which means everything is at 25 pascals, and because there's no difference between this one and this one. I find it confusing sometimes, I'm not going to lie to you. I think it's much better if you just use a reference hose. I think that's the best practice. And kind of why I explain this is not so that you would understand it, but perhaps so that you could see that the other way is probably a lot easier and it doesn't take that much more work. All right, any questions about that? Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about using technology. Another sort of best practice for doing duct testing, blower testing, any of those type of things, when you're using a Wi-Fi gauge, you can connect your computer to that gauge. You can connect your mobile device to that gauge. But here what I'm suggesting is if you're at the house and you have connected to that, and let me back up a second here. This is definitely useful, easy for Wi-Fi gauges, but actually even a non-Wi-Fi gauge we can connect with the actual wire. But either way, if you have an internet connection with this computer, you can actually do a screen share. You can do a screen share, or you can actually run a report and have that report sync online to an online storage. So the option that we have here, this is a best practice because now we are immediately in real time, that means right now, reporting our findings, our results. Or if we want to do a screen share, we can actually get some help from someone. We can get some oversight for someone. Let's assume that some of you code inspectors out there, or some of you design professionals out there who are not in the field, or some of you owners, people that have lots of people in the field, but you need to be, you need to be in one place. If you deploy them with web-enabled devices, you can actually, they can ask you a question and show you what's going on at that house anytime they want, or you can actually kind of drop in on them and say, hey, let me see your test setup, let me see your results. It makes sense, and we do actually have a guide for this. We do actually have a quick guide, a manual for how to actually do that, a setup. It's step by step. We've got videos on it, and we actually do a webinar on it. So if you're interested in more of that, stick around. I'd love to talk more about it. All right, so let's assume that we are running a test here, and this is kind of our last few slides, so sorry if we're getting close to the hour. But let's talk about what happens if we're running a test and we aren't getting any reading from our flow. What that means is that you need to add a flow plug, right? You need to add a range plug. Now, range plug, what that's doing is that is closing up the known hole on our fan, as you can see right here. And that is saying that that basically we're sucking the air that we're actually moving through the fan is going through a smaller hole because we have less flow. So again, remember that this reading right here, the amount of flow that we get, is always related to the known hole that we have. So if we're not getting a flow, that means that that known hole is too big to register something, to give us a result. So what we need to do is add another plug to it. So this does come up. I'm asked frequently from people like, hey, how do I know which range plug to use. Well, I usually say start with the first one, and if you're getting this reading, this sort of dot, this dash, just add another one. Just make sure that on the gauge that you change your settings. So everybody okay with that? So what about the opposite? What about when we're at 100% speed? You see it right here on my DM32 screen share. I'm at the right amount of speed. I'm at 100% speed, but I still can't get to 25 pascals. How do I deal with that? Well, the first thing you want to do is actually same idea as before. Now we want to remove a gauge, or we want to remove a plug. The reason is that that plug was restricting airflow through the fan, and we actually weren't getting enough air through the fan and into the ductwork, or being able to create enough suck enough air out of the ductwork if we're depressurizing the ductwork for us to get to enough power. So one of the things we want to do is open up that fan, open up that known hole so that we can get enough volume of air moving through it. If that doesn't work, you might want to try the at pressure. Does that make sense to everybody? Pam, I think I might have missed your question here. It says, Pam says she's not really okay with it. Could have two range configurations at work, but one is optimum for best measurement. If you're in an area where there is a little bit of overlap, that could work. But I would say if it works, again, this is my personal experience. So she's talking about those range plugs. And what if you have a range plug that works? What if you have two range plugs that actually work for that test? So you might be in an area where you can get results from either plug. I would say then if you're getting results, don't change it. Whatever works best for you. I hope that helps, Pam. Thanks for your insight. Pam, your check's in the mail for sure. You're gonna have to. They're gonna fire me and hire you. Last thing that I want to talk about best practice-wise, and again, we're about 2 minutes over, so thank you so much for sticking with me, are some of the software that we can provide you with. So this one's great. So we actually have a free piece of software that's a duct leakage test report generator. And what it is that it's just an Excel spreadsheet. It's available in 2007 or 2010. Microsoft Windows. It is customizable. You can put your logo in there. You can put whatever type of test you want in there. It will help you calculate. It'll help you just kind of build a report, which is very, very important for many of you out there. The difference between this guy and this guy, the data logger, is that the data logger runs while you're actually running a test. And it can log multiple or one single gauge. And essentially what this does is this allows your computer to take those test results that you're getting from the test while you're actually running the test and actually put them onto a spreadsheet in real time. This guy over here, you're going to have to actually manually input those results. But this guy over here, this takes those results down. Now I'm thinking that in the future, and this is already happening in several countries in Europe, that there are that code officials and codes themselves are going to demand that you have some sort of software that actually takes the readings directly, so that there's no human error involved. But again, both of these are pieces of software that are downloadable from the area of the website that we mentioned earlier, and they're free. So what the heck? You might as well download them, even if just for giggles.